Hello, everyone. We're going to continue talking about the Cold War, and in specifics, we're going to talk about the Vietnam War, China, and Watergate. So, in the 1950s, Vietnam was split in half. Northern Vietnam, which is up here, was communist, while the southern part of Vietnam was democratic. And the 17th parallel is what divided North and South Vietnam. American involvement in Vietnam also reflected the Cold War policy of containment of communists. U.S. didn't want communism to spread. So that goes back to the Truman Doctrine, in which he says, we're not going to attack communist countries, but we don't want communism to spread. And what happened is North Vietnam came in with their troops, started attacking South Vietnam. And beginning the 1950s and continuing to the early 1960s, the communist government of North Vietnam attempted to install through force, which means by war, a communist government in South Vietnam. The United States helped South Vietnam fight. So North Vietnam's communists, they're trying to spread. The Truman policy of containment says we do not allow communism to spread. So we help South Vietnam fight. The American military buildup in Vietnam began under President John Kennedy. President Kennedy was assassinated in 1963 in Dallas, Texas. This event shook the nation's confidence and began a period of internal strife and divisiveness. And many Americans didn't agree with each other this time. For example, the disagreements over the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. So some people thought the U.S. shouldn't be in Vietnam, but John Kennedy was the one that started the United States fighting in Vietnam. And this is John Kennedy. He was in his car with his wife, and someone shot and killed him in Dallas, Texas. And then the buildup of the American military in Vietnam was intensified, which means it got bigger under President Lyndon Johnson. So Kennedy started it, but under Lyndon Johnson, it got much bigger. We had many more troops fighting the war. And the scale of combat in Vietnam grew larger during the 1960s. American military forces repeatedly defeated the North Vietnamese forces in the field, but fought a limited war. The United States only fought up to the 17th parallel, which this is close to what the Korean War was, where they only went to the 30th parallel, but the U.S. would only fight to this line. They would not go into North Vietnam because Truman policy or the Truman Doctrine says we do not attack communist countries. We just stop it from spreading. So America became bitterly divided, which means they didn't agree over the Vietnam War. And on college campuses, many opposed the war, and students actively protested and opposed the war. This is an example of a college campus right here where people are holding signs saying, get out of Vietnam. They did not support the war. There was even a few colleges where there was riots that broke out and police had to shoot and kill people. So it was not a popular war on college campuses. President Lyndon Johnson was very unpopular because of the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War, and he decided not to run for president again. He knew he wasn't going to win if he ran for president, so he didn't want to run again. And after Johnson declined to seek re-election, President Richard Nixon was elected on a pledge to bring the war to an honorable end. So he wanted to end the war, and he instituted a policy of Vietnamization, which was the withdrawing of American troops and replacing them with South Vietnamese forces while maintaining military aid to South Vietnamese. And by 1973, the United States removed all of their troops in Vietnam. So Vietnamization was the U.S. was going to take all of their troops out of Vietnam, and they were going to train South Vietnamese troops, train their army to fight, and they're going to give them weapons. And by 1973, the United States removed all the troops. Vietnamization failed when the South Vietnamese troops proved unable to resist invasion by the Soviet-supplied North Vietnamese army. And in 1975, North and South Vietnam merged under communist control, which means the whole country of Vietnam became communist. So essentially, the U.S. lost this war, South Vietnam lost, North Vietnam won, and all of Vietnam became communist. And unlike veterans of World War II who returned to grateful and supportive nation, Vietnam veterans return often to face indifference or outright hostility from some who opposed the war. So a lot of people did not treat soldiers who fought in Vietnam well. And years after the end of Vietnam, the wounds of the war began to heal in America, and Vietnam veterans were recognized and honored for their service and sacrifice. This is the Vietnam Memorial in DC. So now people start to realize the sacrifice they had and they're treated better. So now we're going back to the US and China. China is a communist country during this time. And while negotiating an end to the Vietnam War, President Nixon, with the Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, instituted the Cold War policy of detente. And detente essentially meant easing Cold War fears. And detente led to Nixon's visit to China and the US's formal recognition of the communist controlled People's Republic of China. So Nixon went to China and he recognized, yes, you're communist, and we understand that. He started having relations with China, starting trading and things like that. And then later on, there was something called the Strategic Arms Limitations Treaty, which stands for SALT. And due to this relaxation of tensions between the United States and China, the Soviets sought to improve relations with the United States, leading to the Strategic Arm Limitations Treaty, also known as SALT. Essentially, the Soviet Union and the United States would limit how many weapons they have. So before, they were just trying to build as many weapons as they could. That was called the arms race. They wanted to have the most nuclear weapons. But now they put limits. So they said we're only going to have 200 of these type of missiles, 1,054. So they're trying to limit how many nuclear weapons they have and how many weapons they have. Last thing we're going to talk about is the Watergate scandal. And in 1972, 5 men were caught breaking into the Democratic National Committee office in the Watergate Hotel. These men were eventually found to be connected to Nixon's administration, leading to his eventual resignation from office. So what this means, resignation means to quit. So Nixon quit being president because he was caught instructing people to steal. He told people to break into this building and steal things for him. And because of that, he knew he was going to be kicked out being president. So he resigned. He quit. He said, I'm not going to be president anymore. All right, that's it for today. If you guys have any questions, let me know.